quality adjusted life years between 1970 and 1990. That's like the benefit side with the total increase in healthcare spending between 1970 and 1990, which would be the cost side. Ideally, of course, you want the benefit side to outweigh the cost side. Now, the other thing that might not be quite as obvious, but is definitely going on here is that so there's two things that can actually sort of, well, there's really three things that can change between 1970 and 1990 that will increase this quality adjusted life years measure, right? So the first thing is that people can just start living longer, presumably through better medical technology, although potentially they could also be changing their habits. So certainly one thing that's going to be going on during this time period is that like smoking will be declining, and that of course can have a pretty substantial effect on population health. But sort of to the extent that it's not, so there's really two things that could be increasing life expectancy. One is probably medical technology, and the other would be improvements in lifestyle. So life years themselves, are the life expectancy could increase. So that's one thing that's going to increase quality adjusted life years, just because you're increasing the total number of life years. The second thing that could change quality adjusted life years between 1970 and 1990 is that the prevalence of various diseases could increase or decrease. So if they get better at sort of treating or curing various diseases, then those diseases could disappear. I mean, not disappear from the population. That's less likely unless you're talking about things that like we have vaccines against and so forth. But you might reduce the prevalence of an untreated disease. So the actual prevalence of diseases might change based on medical technology. And then the last thing, though, that can also move this sort of aggregate quality adjusted life year measure around is that the actual coefficients in this regression, right, the beta 1, the beta 2, and the beta 3 could themselves end up changing, right? So that will potentially also improve quality adjusted life year, right? So basically, if you had a disease that we weren't treating very well before, and then we came up with better treatments of it, it might be the case that you don't entirely cure the disease, but you could essentially sort of reduce the disutility or the suffering of somebody who currently has that disease. And that's probably true of a lot of different diseases. So like you could have like heart disease, and we might not sort of get rid of it entirely, but we might be able to sort of keep it under control better than we did 20 or 30 years ago. Certainly, if you think about something like cancer, there's a case where in some cases, so not in so many, but in some cases there are like treatments that would basically that would be effective enough that didn't exist 30 years ago, and that would be effective enough that you could essentially be considered to be free of a particular type of cancer after getting the treatment. So there's like something called, I think, Leavitt, which is like this, if you look at sort of the so it's a drug that treats, I think it's like a childhood leukemia or something like that. But if you look at sort of a measure of like some sort of like cost effectiveness measure, so basically like increase in life years per dollar spent on the drug or something for cancer drugs, like there's kind of a like very large normal distribution, which sadly isn't all that high in the sense that you're getting like 3 months, 6 month life extensions or something, and the drugs themselves are pretty pricey. So there's sort of like a lot of mass here where maybe it's like cost effective in the sense that the benefits are greater than zero, or at least a little bit greater than the cost, but it's not like it's not like you're getting additional 20 years of life or something for a relatively low expenditure. And then it's like it's like all the way out here like 6 standard deviations or something above everything else, because it basically like it cured like this particular cancer that was placental children, and so you're getting like 80 life years additional or something for not all that much expense, and it's super duper effective. So in some cases, like you could basically actually eliminate that disease entirely with a new treatment. In most cases, it's more like we'll have treatments that are sort of more effective in the sense that either they'll prolong your life somewhat, but it's not like they're necessarily giving you an additional 20 or 30 years of life, or they'll sort of improve your quality of life during those periods. So maybe it's like it's not necessarily that it's so much more effective than the old treatment, but it's not like as terrible as the previous type of chemotherapy that they had or something like that. So that would be a case then where when you re-estimated that regression in say 1990 or in 2010 or something like that, you might actually see the coefficients on some of these variables decline in magnitude just because the sort of quality of life associated with having a particular disease has gone up due to increases in medical technology. So that's the third way in which this aggregate quality of life year measure can move around. Basically, the weights themselves, the coefficients themselves, could change over time, and that's what they find. So when they run the regression using the 1990 data, they find that these coefficients are generally less negative than the same coefficients in 1970. So it seems as if there's sort of less disutility associated with a lot of the diseases than there used to be at that point. So overall, when they then compute this aggregate quality adjusted life year measure and compare it over time, they do find that the benefits of new medical technology might potentially justify the cost. So the expected medical costs increased by $19,000 for infants and by $34,000 for people who are age 65. So you have substantial increases in costs, but you also have substantial increases in this health capital measure, this quality adjusted life year measure. So they saw it as, or they calculated as increasing by $95,000 for infants and $169,000 for people who are age 65. So you could say, well, we're spending, say, so let's concentrate on age 65. So we're spending $34,000 more per person who's age 65 in 1990 than we were in 1970, but the health capital measure has increased by $169,000. So that seems like basically you've got benefits that are I don't know, I guess about 5 times the costs potentially. So that sounds pretty good. But you have to sort of realize that there are several assumptions going into this calculation. So first of all, probably most importantly, the key assumption here is that all of the increase in health capital that you observe between 1970 and 1990 is all actually being caused by improvements in medical technology or increases in medical spending. So that's unlikely to be true. There are some sort of lifestyle factors that are also at play here. So for example, smoking rates certainly declined over that period and are continuing to decline. So I think it's sort of using that $169,000 figure and assigning all of it to increases in medical spending and improvements in medical technology. That seems like sort of overly optimistic. That being said, given that it is 5 times the cost figure, even if you were to knock it down by 2 or 3 or 4, basically as long as you don't knock it down by more than 5, you're still going to conclude that the average return to medical spending during the average sort of net benefit to medical spending during the period would have been positive in the sense that the benefits outweigh the costs, right? So on average, that would then be true, but that by itself doesn't necessarily mean that our spending is efficient, right? Because what we want to think about here is not really the average return to healthcare spending, but the marginal return to healthkare spending. So, just because we see that the average net return is positive, does that imply that the marginal dollar of healthcare spending is actually efficient in the sense that it actually produces $1 or more of benefits? The answer is not necessarily, because that flat curve graph that we drew up a couple lectures ago demonstrates that the average return and the marginal return can differ substantially, right? So this is like sort of Econ 1 type stuff, but again, if we had health on the y-axis and then spending on the x-axis, and the actual relationship between the two of them looks like that, then for any given point, so in particular, let's consider the point that's sort of way out here towards the right. So the marginal return is always going to be the tangent line to that curve at any given point. So you can see that at this point, even how is like overly optimistic, probably has a little bit more of a positive slope than it should. But at this point, basically, the slope of that tangent is like very, very small, and so there's a very low marginal return. The average, though, is going to be the slope of the straight line that connects, almost straight line that connects the origin and the point at which we're looking on the curve. And of course, that has a much steeper slope because it's benefiting from the high marginal returns in the sort of earlier, the lower spending regions. And so just because the average, so what we're basically saying here is that we see that the average return is potentially pretty high, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the marginal return is high, right? We might still be at a point where it would be effective or it would be more efficient to actually sort of reduce spending on the margin, even though the average return is positive. So one example would just be like heart disease. So a relatively cheap treatment for heart disease is to basically give people aspirin, which believe it or not is like surprisingly effective and effectively free. That costs like pennies a day at most. And then also the next step is basically to give them beta blockers, which is another type of drug which was invented some time ago now. Again, is effective, I'm sure it's like not under patent anymore, so it's also going to be pretty cheap. So you can actually get very high return per dollar spent just for these initial treatments. The next option, well, not necessarily the next option, but a much more expensive treatment option is going to be some sort of cardiac surgery where they go in and either insert a stent or do something else or a bypass or something, to basically go in and intervene in the actual blood vessels that are going to and from your heart and try to treat it that way. That may be effective, but certainly is much more expensive. And so it could be the case that sort of when you look at total spending on heart disease, and so total like medical spending on heart disease for all of these different treatment options, it's almost surely going to be the case that the total benefits of that spending outweigh the costs. So the average net benefit per dollar spent has to be positive. But it could also be the case, especially in sort of the marginal surgery case, that the marginal return to cardiac surgery could be negative. So that's not to say that you never want to do cardiac surgery, but it certainly could be the case that for the people who are on the margin of doing surgery or not, there might actually be a negative return. There might be a negative return just the actual gross cost. It might make them worse off. But certainly when you think about the costs involved, it could well be that the benefits are much less than the costs. So this would be a case where we're quite confident, I would say, that the average return of these treatments is positive, but on the margin you might actually have a negative return. So we spend a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily seem like we get a lot more. So this slide is actually kind of interesting because it's kind of like, it's evolving right now, and I'll probably revise it in like a couple of years when ACA has been fully implemented. But I think the general consensus would be that the U.S. probably has the best care available, or at least there aren't countries that necessarily have better care available. But that is restricted. But that care is restricted to a more limited group of people. So sort of up until this last year or two, it was the groups that generally had access to care were made up of privately insured people who are all insured through their employers, seniors through Medicare. So Medicare has sort of a long history. It dates back to the 1960s. Originally, it basically covered hospitals and doctors. It did not cover pharmaceuticals, didn't cover drugs because back then those were not a significant expenditure. But drugs have become more and more expensive over time, and they've actually turned into sort of major, so they become more prevalent and they become more expensive, and so they've actually turned into a major expenditure. So back in the early 2000s, they came out with what they call Medicare Part D, which was a drug coverage component of Medicare. It was really weird. It had this thing they called a donut where they were cover your expenditures up to $50,000 and it would stop covering everything, and then coverage would kick back in after a few $1,000s more. There's absolutely no sort of economic reasoning behind that at all. It was just put in there so that it could make the budget numbers fit in. That is being phased out. I guess now sort of the main thing that Medicare doesn't cover, which people might not realize until they get old, is it doesn't actually cover any sort of nursing home type of expenditure. So it's currently the case that what you'll sort of see people do if they don't have a lot of assets is that, ironically, so Medicaid, which we said was insurance for lower income people, will cover nursing home expenditure. So what you'll see is that people who are over age 65 will actually sort of spend down their assets to basically get down to zero, and then at that point, if they end up in a nursing home, then Medicaid could cover them. So I actually know, we have a friend whose mother basically just transferred the house out of her name to her children and stuff, so that if she ends up in a nursing home in 5 or 10 years or something like that, she would be covered under Medicaid. So it's a very, obviously that was not the intent of the system, and it's probably not a very efficient design, but everything's kind of patchwork right now. Obviously, if you're wealthy enough, you can just afford the care, so no problem there. And then low income / uninsured children are covered under Medicaid, and as we discussed, some of their other people in the family who are adults tend to be covered as well. That coverage is being expanded as part of ACA. So the Affordable Care Act, basically, the sort of two ways that they're trying to increase the group of people who have coverage are, first of all, through expanding Medicaid eligibility. So that's one angle of attack, and then the other angle of attack is having an individual mandate where people are required to buy insurance or face penalties. And the individual mandate is combined with a subsidy for lower income individuals who otherwise wouldn't be able to afford insurance. So we'll talk more about sort of how the individual mandate, the individual mandate, mechanically, of course, it helps that whenever you require somebody to buy something, it's going to increase the probability they buy it. But that's not, the goal is not simply sort of to mechanically increase the coverage rate. Rather, it is to lower the health insurance premium rate by reducing the adverse selection problem, which is something that we're going to talk a lot more about next week. And we'll do an activity where you guys get to be insurers and patients and see whether or not adverse selection appears in the classroom. Yeah.
I know that under ACA, there's still millions of people that aren't covered.
Right.
I was wondering, who are those people? Are they low income?
Yeah, so who ends up not really doing? That's a good question. So I don't know how much of it is. So first of all, this is it's literally a moving target because it's currently being phased in, and people are even when the policies are all fully active, I think it takes people several years to even learn, because you don't know exactly when or where you're supposed to sign up, and then you have to get hit with a penalty before it's salient enough that you're like, oh, I want to pay that again or something. That being said, so I think there's sort of a variety of things. So So I would guess that there's probably some low-income people who might be eligible for subsidies, but basically have not taken advantage of them, either because they're not aware or because they tried and website crashed or whatever. There's probably some sort of middle-income people. Like there's probably some people kind of in the range where you're like, you have sort of low enough income that that even with the lower premiums, like it's not super attractive to buy insurance, but you have a high enough income that you don't qualify for like all that large subsidy, and so you're sort of on the margin there, and maybe you end up just paying the penalty rather than being insured if you thought that you were like pretty healthy. And then the Medicaid expansion too is kind of tied up because it's again it's organized at the federal level, but it's actually implemented at the state level, and some states are like rejecting it for political reasons and stuff. So I think I don't think there's just one sort of group that's not covered. It's kind of like a variety of factors. Okay, so I guess we will begin on Friday and finish up this part.